shut down Lakeshore Drive. That doesn't help the city of Chicago either. People need to get to work. They need to get home to see their kids. The city wasn't happy about that either.
Well, that's true. And, you know, the reason I had the march on that date on Thursday was basically to have historical context, because yesterday was the 52nd anniversary of Martin Luther King's march through Marquette Park, through hostile crowds that hit him in the head with a brick. Now, when he did that march, he didn't have Richard J. Daley's sanction. He didn't have the police chief strategizing with him. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And what that was is that we must awaken our other brothers and sisters in this city, let them know there are people here that are desperate, that are hurting, that are broken. In other words, we have to redistribute the pain, make others uncomfortable, redistribute the anguish, and also redistribute the dormant hope. Our task in having these marches and these demonstrations, first of all, before people can do anything, we have to inspire the uninspired. We have to ignite them, reignite them, because as long as they are just dormant and they're dead in their consciousness, you know, they're not going to do anything.
Reverend Gregory Livingston, thank you for coming on the program tonight. We wish the best for the people of that city, and we do not want to see another weekend like this.
Meanwhile, one local Democrat in Chicago is putting politics aside, desperately, rightly, trying to rescue his city from what has been a wave of violence that has been devastating his hometown since Obama began his presidency. Watch this.
I represent a community on the west side that the government allows drugs and gangs to dominate those communities, where senior citizens and children are hostage. They are hostage in their homes. They are hostage in their community, and they can't enjoy the liberties that are afforded to them by everyone else, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And we need the president's help in Chicago. The mayor must take away the thought that Chicago is a Trump-free zone, because taxpayers deserve to have the president come in and bring resources to the community. We need to make sure that the billions of dollars that we send to Washington comes back, and the mayor should be working closely with Trump.
This has to be a tipping point. Our national treasure, our children, over 70 shot, 12 killed, dozens others fighting for their lives, a city with a gang violence epidemic that seems never ending. Where's Rambo Deadfish? He can't curtail violent crime. If he can't do it, step aside, or at the very least, ask for help from the president. Talk to Rudy Giuliani. He fixed New York City. Lives of our children are at stake here. Law-abiding citizens are held hostage and getting killed. We've got to stop it. I do hope the president sees what's happening and is able to step in and help the city of Chicago.
My Brother's Keeper initiative. It was launched in 2014, and it started out as a way to assist at-risk boys, mostly of color. In the first year, he raised $300 million in corporate donations to help get young men jobs through mentoring and other work fairs, work projects. No real measure yet of the program's real impact, but to the extent that it stresses hard work and personal responsibility, I think it's great.
I stopped being nice.
Look, y'all, and it stopped just because Democrats started using it a couple of years back. People of color, I got it on the parent channel here. Half of my subs are African American, and many of them agreed with me. I came with like, well, you're forgetting about all them magenta brothers, brothers. That's a language from the 60s, anachronistic at best, meaning outdated, old-fashioned. And now it's become like acceptable use again. What was old is new again. This is not a good evolution, right? People of minority ethnicity. Thank you. All right, continuing on.
I being nonchalant. I started caring about my grades and the difference between an A and a B. I started demanding more out of myself. I know experience, excellence is possible, and I need to strive for that.
Too often, however, the social justice warriors fall into the grievance trap of excusing rather than punishing what ends up being criminal behavior. Now, remember the looting and the violence that we saw in Ferguson and Baltimore a few years ago during what were supposed to be protests about the death of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray? Well, President Obama used a My Brother's Keeper event to provide context, almost to explain away the violence.
Some communities have consistently had the odds stacked against them. That there's a tragic history in this country that has made it tougher for some. That sense of unfairness and of powerlessness, that's helped fuel some of the protests that we've seen in places like Baltimore and Ferguson. In too many places in this country, black boys and black men.
So
Latino boys, Latino men. They experience being treated differently.
That's our past president's typical eloquent rhetoric in retrospect. But what did he do about it?
Race baiting. And the king of this is Al Sharpton.
His
Remember his contribution to stemming the violence in Chicago?
On his retrospect.
His contribution was renting an apartment in the city for some period of time in 2013.
In September, we, Martin Luther night, are going to take an apartment on the west side and stay among the people and walk children to school.
I'm pretty sure after we rented the apartment, things got worse, but I'm surprised that didn't do the trick. Great idea, Al. Look, I don't doubt that young people living in the Englewood or the West Garfield Park neighborhoods of Chicago can feel really hopeless and even distrustful against the police. But the real problem isn't aggressive policing. The real problem are gangs with memberships that have become generational. Young boys without fathers or any male role models. Anyone who cares about them who's a male are too often sucked into the cults of criminality. Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who knows a thing or two about cleaning up the city, thinks it's time to show the man they once called Rombo the door, tweeting, Chicago murders are a direct result of one party democratic rule for decades.
Most of his former Dems
Policing
did. He was like a political
Gary McCarthy
wizard.
Can do for Chicago what I did for New York City. He was one of the architects of Comstat. It slashed homicide,
the mayorship of Chicago, and it's been all downhill.
Thousands of lives saved. Well, it's true that citizens most affected seem to be growing very weary of Emanuel's political dance.
Ron Emanuel, first of all, is a con man. His whole job is to keep black folks divided.
No, he doesn't care about anybody but the people in his neighborhood and his family.
Opposition to Mayor Emanuel, Obama's protege, it's been building for many reasons. Part of it, the schools, the crime now, and remember how proud he was about this.
Chicago was a sanctuary city before anybody knew what sanctuary city meant. This ordinance that we are defending in the federal court is consistent with that value system. And not only it gives honor and importance to the past.
Hey, there's your Democrat priorities, on display. Bravo.
Well, that's not going over so well on the South Side.
He cares more about non-citizens, African Americans with citizens, and our ancestors built this country. He got some good things, but I think he don't step up and come to the people where the crime is. You know what I'm saying? The crime is on the South Side and the West Side.
And there's the abysmally low percentage of murderers brought to justice under his leadership. In 2017, the police solved only 114 of the 650 murders that occurred in the same year.
Pay attention to that. That's the source.
17.5% only.
This isn't Fox News' opinion, or their slanted,
was 60%.
It's
no wonder people on the South Side are frustrated.
Statistics.
So many have
you
promised
can't say
to try to
Fox
help
News
Chicago,
is biased
but few have
in
delivered
that
solutions.
their sources back up
Maybe because
their
harsh
assertions.
truths are uncomfortable. And maybe because sometimes they're not politically correct.
That's why I switched parties.
Now, I've been saying since the campaign of 2016 that we need to see more bold-thinking conservatives in the inner cities of this country. The risk is not in showing up. The risk is in not showing up. Solutions, not politics, are what is needed.
I have to make sure that President Trump recognized that not everyone believes that Chicago is a Trump-free zone. If he's serious about helping the people in Chicago, especially on the west side of Chicago, I accept his help. We can't turn any help away. We have to make sure that people understand that criminals cannot have their way with our streets. If Chicago Police Department and all the other law enforcement can't do it, we should seek other help. Well, I have to say that Chicago is worse than the days of Al Capone. It's the bloodiest city in America, and I have to say that Democrats have to step up. I'm a Democrat, and I'm saying that Democrats must step up. All of the Democrats, all of my colleagues must step up and put politics aside. We must work with President Trump, and we must demand that we get help in the city of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, and in our south side communities, so that we can bring safety to all of the communities in the city. There are 77 communities in the Chicago community, and every community is feeling the trauma from the violence and destruction that's happening in the bloody city of Chicago.
Representative Ford, I remember during the campaign that candidate Trump in March of 2016 had a speech scheduled in Chicago, and they had to cancel it because of threats of protest, violence. People say, we don't want you here. I thought that was such a shame, because I actually think...
I actually have that on the
more
channel.
ideas,
There's like a weird UFO thing
ideas that have been employed have failed.
Totally off subject.
Now, he's done pretty well with the economy. Maybe he could bring some new thinking and some fresh ideas to this current situation. I think it's beyond tragic. I think you are brave as a Democrat for speaking out.
Absolutely.
And at least being open.
That's courageous.
I mean, you are going to get, and I know you've already gotten blowback, and I want to hear from, former police officer in Chicago who tell us the way things are on the street for the police, who have been oftentimes demonized. But he was not allowed to come to Chicago, an American city. That was outrageous. That told me a lot about Chicago back in March of 2016.
Less than a year ago, I lost my cousin on the west side of Chicago with his girlfriend in the car. I never told Giano that, and I haven't told anyone publicly, but they lost their lives in a car with some type of drive-by on the west side of Chicago to leave two kids without parents.